My son-in-law sabotaged my yacht's faucet to humiliate the poor plumber he thought I was. He didn't realize the $2.8 million vessel was mine, and that his arrogance just cost him his entire inheritance. Before continuing, write where you are from, or what time it is. The brass faucet handle snapped under my grip, sending a spray of cold salt water across the mahogany counter of my yacht, the Serenity. It was May 17, 2025, and my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. 2 months of planning, $2.8 million in cash, and 30 years of building businesses from nothing had led to this moment. I stood in the galley, wiping my hands on a rag, watching my son-in-law, Derek, lead my daughter Lindsay onto the deck at the Newport Marina. Derek stepped aboard first, his designer loafers clicking against the teak deck with a sound that made my skin crawl. His eyes swept across the polished chrome and leather seating, and I saw that familiar smirk return to his face. "Well, well," Derek said, running his manicured hand along the butter-soft leather of the main seating area. "How the hell did you afford this floating palace, Ronald?" The words hit me like a slap. Not Dad, not even Ron. Always Ronald, delivered with that particular tone that made my name sound like something distasteful. Lindsay followed him, her designer handbag clutched against her chest as she looked around with a note of embarrassment I had grown to dread. "Dad, please tell me you didn't blow your entire retirement savings on this," she whispered. Her voice carried the weight of a decade of my generosity, from the $25,000 wedding contribution to the $6,000 down payment on their house. Yet she looked at me like I was a child who had wandered away from a caretaker. I managed to keep my voice steady despite the storm building inside my chest. "I thought it would be nice for the family to spend some time together," I said. "Time together on what?" Derek laughed, his voice devoid of humor. "Your midlife crisis." He opened a storage compartment, peering inside like he was appraising inventory for a liquidation sale. "I mean, I get it, Ronald. You want to feel successful, but this is just embarrassing. How much debt did you take on for this fantasy?" Lindsay touched his arm lightly, but he turned to face me fully, his arms crossed. "Your father has clearly made some questionable financial decisions," he said to her. "We should probably have a family meeting about managing his assets before he loses everything." The words hung in the salt air like poison. Managing my assets, as if I were some doting fool who had stumbled into a dealership with a credit card I couldn't pay off. The rental company assured me everything was in order, I said carefully, keeping the lie level. I had bought this boat in March for $2.8 million as a gift to them, a way to bridge the growing chasm Derek had dug between us. But now that plan felt like a house of cards in a hurricane. Rental? Derek's eyebrows shot up. "Well, that's slightly less insane, though still pretty ridiculous for someone living on Social Security." My hands clenched behind my back. He had no idea about the 3 companies I had sold for figures he couldn't comprehend. To him, my khakis and modest sedan meant I was poor. "Why don't you all explore below deck while I prepare some refreshments?" I suggested, needing space to breathe. "Come on, babe," Derek said to Lindsay, already heading toward the cabin. "Let's see how much your dad spent on his little boat adventure." They disappeared below, and I heard Derek's voice echoing up through the hatch, mocking the marble countertops. Each word felt like a needle under my skin. I stood near the railing, gripping the brass until my knuckles went white. I had planned this to be an investment in healing, funded by Margaret's life insurance money, but standing there, I realized I was serving a meal of kindness to a man who only hungered for contempt. I followed them down into the salon, where the mahogany table gleamed under the soft lighting. I had set the table with bone china and crystal glasses, a $1,800 setup for a lunch they didn't deserve. Derek remained standing, examining the built-in bar. "Fully stocked too, I see," he said, lifting a bottle of aged scotch. "This bottle alone probably costs more than most people's car payments." "Derek," his father William said with growing disapproval, but Derek just grinned. "Not everyone gets to play millionaire for a weekend, Ronald." I served the grilled salmon mechanically, my mind churning with memories of the $14,000 in direct assistance I had given them over the years. I sat at the head of my own table, listening to my son-in-law toast to family adventures we can't afford, and felt something cold and calculating crystallize in my chest. The clink of Derek's glass against the table marked the end of my patience. "You will stop this behavior immediately," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Derek's eyebrows shot up in theatrical surprise. "Behavior? I'm just being honest about the situation," he sneered. "Someone in this family should acknowledge reality." "The reality," I replied, "is that you are a guest on this yacht. You will show appropriate respect or you will leave." Lindsay gasped, and Derek's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he laughed. "Come on, Ronald, we're family. I can't express concern about your financial decisions." "Your concern sounds remarkably like mockery," I said, setting my utensils down with careful precision. William cleared his throat, trying to intervene, but Derek's voice rose, his composure cracking. "Pretend this yacht rental isn't way beyond his means?" He gestured dismissively at the crystal. "This is someone trying to play in a league where he doesn't belong." I saw Lindsay nod slightly, a tiny motion that hit me harder than any of Derek's insults. She agreed with him. After everything I had sacrificed, she saw me as a pathetic old man pretending to have wealth I didn't possess. "I think you should excuse yourself from this table," I said, my voice deadly quiet. Derek's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Excuse myself from a rented yacht?" He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the teak floor. "Maybe I will." Suddenly the air feels a bit stifling in here. He moved toward the stairs, calling back that I shouldn't worry about cleaning up because he was sure the rental company had people for that. His footsteps echoed on the deck above us, deliberately heavy. The salon fell silent, save for the gentle creaking of the hull against the dock. "Ronald, I apologize," William said, his face thick with embarrassment. "Inexcusable," Sarah added. Lindsay said nothing, staring at her salmon. When Lindsay finally looked up, her eyes were defensive. "He's just protective of family finances," she said. "We've been talking about buying a house, and money is tight, and seeing this, it's hard to understand the priorities." My priority had been creating a bridge back to the daughter I was losing, but her priority was maintaining her husband's comfortable illusions. I stood slowly, gathering the plates. "Of course I understand," I said, but I understood more than she realized. I understood that respect couldn't be bought with $2.8 million gifts. From above deck came the sound of cabinet doors opening and closing. Derek was exploring areas he had no business accessing, making himself at home on property he didn't own. I moved to the galley to tidy up, but my ears were tuned to the sounds from above. Water running briefly, then a soft scrape of metal. A faint grinding noise made me pause. That wasn't the sound of someone looking around. "Dad, are you all right?" Lindsay asked from the doorway. "Fine," I replied, but my stomach settled into a winter fog. The grinding stopped, replaced by the soft closing of a door. A few minutes later, Derek appeared at the top of the stairs, looking more relaxed than he had all day. "Sorry about that," he said with a slight smile. "Just needed a moment to appreciate the craftsmanship." His complete reversal sent warning signals through my nervous system. Derek didn't apologize, and he certainly didn't compliment things he'd been mocking minutes earlier. "Actually, I was thinking maybe I should help with the cleanup," he continued. "Get familiar with the boat systems." I stood slowly, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. "Why don't we all move to the deck first?" I suggested, but Derek was already moving toward the galley. "Let me make up for being such an ass earlier," he said. I followed him, drawn by a horrible certainty that I was about to discover exactly what those metallic sounds had been. "Everything is perfect," Derek called out with a false brightness as he stood at the galley sink. Then, he made a theatrical show of tugging at the faucet. "Oh, it seems to be stuck," he said, water streaming from the tap in an uncontrolled torrent. "Won't turn off properly. Must be one of those quirky old boat problems." I moved him aside and looked at the base of the faucet. The chrome finish showed fresh scratches, deep gouges that hadn't been there this morning. These were marks from pliers, from someone using excessive force to twist the internal mechanism until it snapped. This wasn't wear and tear. This was deliberate destruction disguised as an accident. "Probably just need some WD-40, Derek suggested, his voice dripping with mock helpfulness. "These marine fixtures take a beating." I knelt to examine the damage, my fingers running over the gouged metal. Someone had gripped the faucet and twisted until something gave way. "It's definitely broken," I said, standing slowly. Derek nodded sympathetically. "Rental equipment, you know. Probably gets rough treatment from previous guests. Good thing it happened now instead of in the middle of the night." The casualness of his lie confirmed what I already knew. Confronting him in front of everyone would accomplish nothing, so I told them I needed to contact the marina for a technician. Derek shook his head. "Good luck with that on a Saturday. You might be stuck with it for the weekend." The barely concealed satisfaction in his voice made my hands clench. He was enjoying the inconvenience he had caused, playing the sympathetic family member while I dealt with the fallout of his sabotage. William approached, frowning at the faucet. "That's odd," he said. "The damage looks almost deliberate." Derek's smile never wavered. "Salt air is murder on these fittings," he said, but William, with his engineer's background, wasn't buying it. "Ronald, this looks like tool marks," William observed. Derek quickly suggested it was from previous repair attempts. The lie came so naturally that I almost admired the audacity. He was betting that no one would seriously consider that he would vandalize his host's property. I told them I'd check the maintenance manual. What I actually needed was to check the high-definition security cameras I had installed the month before. I waited until the others were settled on deck, then moved quietly toward the navigation station. The room was tucked behind the main cabin, filled with equipment most guests never saw. I slipped inside and powered up the monitors. 8 camera feeds flooded the small space with light. My fingers moved across the control panel, scrolling back to 3:50 p.m. There was Derek on camera 3. At first, his movements were normal, but then he approached the faucet. I watched him test it. It worked perfectly. He knew it worked. Then, confirming he was alone, he gripped the handle with both hands and twisted with a violent wrenching motion. I watched him brace his foot against the cabinet for leverage, applying maximum force until the mechanism snapped. The timestamp read 15:52:41. He then searched the drawers, found a dish towel, and wiped away any metal shavings or fingerprints. The methodical cleanup told me everything I needed to know about his character. This wasn't an impulse. It was calculated vandalism designed to humiliate me. I copied the footage to a portable drive. Derek's voice drifted down from the deck, artificially concerned about the boat problems. I ejected the drive and slipped it into my pocket, feeling the weight of the evidence. Derek wanted to play games, but he had just handed me the ammunition to end them. I moved to the yacht's tool locker, selecting a precision wrench set. My hands worked automatically, gathering what I needed while my mind tallied the years of generosity Derek had met with contempt. Lindsay's graduate school tuition, $4,000. Their wedding, $25,000. The down payment, $6,000. Emergency car repairs, $5,000. It was nearly $14,000 in direct assistance, and it had purchased nothing but entitlement. I knelt by the broken mechanism, the twisted metal reflecting my own damaged relationship with my daughter. From above, Derek called out, asking if I needed a hand. The faucet mechanism slid back into place with a satisfying click after 20 minutes of work. Marine fixtures are built to withstand storms, just not spiteful sons-in-law. I stood up, wiping my hands, and stepped back into the dining area. There he was, leaning back in his chair with that smug expression. "How'd the repair go, Ronald? Still having fits with the old equipment?" I set my tablet on the dining table with deliberate precision. "Actually, Derek, I'd like to ask you something specific about that faucet," I said, watching his face drain of color. "Me?" Derek's eyebrows shot up. "I'm no plumber, Ronald." Lindsay shifted uncomfortably, defending him as usual, saying he was just trying to help. I kept my eyes fixed on Derek. "I'm curious about exactly what happened when you were down there," I said. Derek's smile stayed, but something flickered behind his eyes. A split second of calculation. "Like I said, just use the facilities," he stammered. I reached for my tablet. "I have some footage that might interest everyone," I said. Derek's confidence faltered. "Footage? What footage?" "The yacht has a security system," I explained. 8 cameras, high definition with audio. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Derek's Adam's apple bobbed, but he tried to maintain his stance. "Well, then you'll see exactly what I told you." I agreed and opened the video application. Let's all take a look together. Sarah leaned forward anxiously, while William's businessman instincts took over. Let's see what the cameras show, he said firmly. I touched the screen, scrolling to 155023. Derek appeared on screen, stepping into the galley with that casual confidence I had come to despise. We watched as on-screen Derek tested the faucet. It worked perfectly. Interesting, I observed. The faucet seems to be functioning normally. Lindsay leaned closer, her brow furrowed. Keep watching, I suggested. The interesting part is coming up. Derek shifted in his seat, muttering that I was making a mountain out of a molehill. But as the timestamp hit 1552, he saw himself on screen, bracing his foot against the cabinet. He saw himself wrenching the handle with both hands until the sharp crack of breaking metal filled the room. The audio was crystal clear. Derek's satisfied grunt as the fixture broke was unmistakable. "Derek," William's voice cracked like a whip. "What the hell are you doing?" On screen, Derek wasn't finished. He was wiping away metal shavings with a dish towel, methodically cleaning up his sabotage. "You even brought a towel," I observed. "Very thorough." Lindsay was staring at the screen in shock. "Derek, how could you? This is Dad's rental. He'll have to pay for damages." The irony of her concern for my rental costs on my own yacht was almost too much to bear. Derek's mask had completely crumbled. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered. "I was trying to fix it, and it broke, and I panicked." "You panicked?" William's voice was heavy with disgust. "We just watched you deliberately destroy someone else's property. There's no accident here." Sarah was dabbing at her eyes, telling me how ashamed she was. Derek made one last desperate attempt, claiming the faucet was defective. I stopped the video and turned the tablet toward him. "Would you like me to play it again in slow motion?" I asked. "We can count how many times you wrenched it." The silence was deafening. Derek stared at the frozen image of his own face, captured in a moment of pure, vindictive satisfaction. "Fine," he finally snapped, his last thread of bravado breaking. "I broke the damn faucet. But Ronald's been acting like some yacht club millionaire all day, throwing money around on rentals he can't afford just to make the rest of us feel small." The admission hung in the air like poison. Lindsay stared at her husband as if she had never seen him before. "You did this on purpose, to teach my father a lesson about living within his means?" Derek shot back that someone had to show me I didn't belong here. I closed the tablet and smiled. "Well, Derek, speaking of pretending to be something you're not, it's time we discuss the truth." Derek leaned forward, trying to salvage his dignity by calling it a minor repair on a rental boat. "You seem very concerned about the owner," I observed. "Well, yeah," he said, trying to regain the moral high ground. "You're way over your budget, Ronald. Someone like you, a retired plumber living on Social Security, trying to impress us with boats you can't afford. It's embarrassing." The silence that followed was absolute. I stood slowly, my voice calm as morning mist. "Derek," I said, "this is my yacht." The words dropped like anvils. Derek's mouth opened and closed without sound. Lindsay's hand flew to her chest. "You're what?" Derek whispered. "My yacht," I repeated. "I bought it in March for $2.8 million in cash." The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. "That's not possible," he managed to choke out. "The Serenity is registered in my name," I said, letting each fact settle. "I purchased it as a gift." Lindsay found her voice first, asking who it was for. I looked directly at Derek, watching the realization dawn on him. "For you and your husband," I said. "I was planning to surprise you today, reveal it was yours to keep." The sound Lindsay made was a sob. $2.8 million, William said in horror. "You were going to give them a $2.8 million yacht after the $14,000 in support you've already provided?" Derek finally found his voice, stammering that they had no idea. "No," I agreed. "You had no idea the plumber you were mocking was making you a millionaire. You spent the day sabotaging the very man who was handing you a fortune." "Ronald," Sarah whispered, "we are so sorry." But I was looking at Derek, watching him process the magnitude of what his arrogance had cost him. I corrected gently. "I was planning to give you this yacht. Now I think it's time for you and Lindsay to gather your things and leave my boat." The silence in the cabin was so thick it felt like the air had turned to liquid. Derek sat paralyzed, his face a ghostly shade of white as he stared at the $2.8 million reality he had just dismantled with a pair of pliers. "Wait, Ronald," he stammered, his voice thin and cracking like dry parchment. "You said was planning. We can work this out. Now that I understand the situation, we can fix everything." I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence or ease his discomfort. "What you understand, Derek, is that you just lost a fortune," I said, my voice as cold as the deep Atlantic. "You don't regret the cruelty. You regret the consequence." Lindsay was shaking, her designer handbag forgotten on the floor. "Dad, please," she sobbed, reaching out toward me. He didn't mean it. The stress of the house hunt, the money being tight, he just snapped. I looked at my daughter and saw the years of excuses I had funded with my own hard work. "You watched him wrench that handle, Lindsay," I said softly. "You heard him call me a pathetic pensioner, and you nodded. You chose to stand behind a man who destroys things for sport." The boat stayed perfectly still in its slip, but the world between us had shifted 10,000 miles. Derek lurched forward, his eyes darting around the mahogany salon as if searching for a hidden exit from his own stupidity. "I'll pay for the repair," he blurted out, his hands trembling. "I'll pay for a complete renovation of the galley. $10,000, $20,000, whatever it takes. I'll make it right." I let out a short, dry laugh that startled even me. "Derek, the repair took 20 minutes and cost me nothing but a bit of sealant. You can't pay for the character you don't have. You didn't break a faucet, you broke a family." William stood up, his weathered face etched with a shame so deep he couldn't even look at his own son. "Derek, be quiet," he commanded, and the authority in his voice was a physical weight. "You've said more than enough today. You've revealed yourself as a vandal and a bully." Sarah sat beside him, her silver hair catching the light as she wept silently into a tissue. The dream of a happy family weekend had evaporated, leaving behind only the cold, hard facts of the security footage. I walked over to the cabin door and held it open, the salt breeze filling the room. "I want you both off my boat now," I said, the finality in my tone leaving no room for negotiation. "I've spent 30 years building things up, and I won't spend another minute watching you tear them down." Derek opened his mouth to protest, but one look at the tablet still glowing with the image of his sabotage silenced him. He stood up, his pride replaced by a frantic, hollow desperation that made him look smaller than he ever had. Lindsay stood up too, her eyes red and pleading. "Where are we supposed to go, Dad?" she asked. "Back to the reality you both were so keen for me to acknowledge," I replied. "Back to the life you have without my checkbook to soften the edges." As they gathered their things, the sound of Derek's heavy footsteps on the teak deck no longer sounded like a man in charge. It sounded like a man walking toward a future he had burned to the ground for the sake of a smirk. I stood on the deck of the Serenity, watching them walk down the long wooden pier of the Newport Marina. Derek was gesturing wildly, his voice carrying over the water as he turned his anger on Lindsay. She walked with her head down, her shoulders hunched as if trying to disappear into her expensive coat. They reached their car, a luxury sedan that I had helped them finance, and sped away, leaving nothing but the smell of exhaust in the spring air. The quiet that followed was profound, broken only by the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull. William and Sarah joined me by the railing, their presence a quiet comfort in the wake of the storm. "Ronald, I don't know what to say," William said, his hand gripping the brass rail. "I raised that boy to be a man of honor." I failed. I shook my head. "You didn't fail, William. He chose this path. He chose to look at a man in a polo shirt and see a target instead of a father. We stood there for a long time, watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the horizon. The $28 million yacht sat under us, a masterpiece of engineering and leather, yet it felt strangely light now. The burden of the secret, the pressure of the surprise, it was all gone. I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known since Margaret passed away. I had tried to buy my daughter's love and her husband's respect, but the security camera had given me something much more valuable: the truth. It showed me that no amount of money could fix a heart that was already broken. Sarah touched my arm gently. "What will you do with the boat, Ronald?" she asked softly. I looked out at the forest of masts in the harbor and smiled. "I'm going to use it," I said. "I'm going to learn every inch of this coastline. I'm going to host the people who see me, not my bank account." I realized then that the Serenity wasn't just a gift I had intended for them. It was the sanctuary I had actually built for myself. We went back inside and finished the wine, talking about the old days when things were simpler. We laughed about our first businesses and the mistakes we made when we had nothing but ambition and a few $100s. The mahogany table that was supposed to be the centerpiece of a family reunion was now the site of a different kind of gathering, one built on genuine respect and the shared history of two old friends. The crystal glasses rang with a clear, honest sound. As the stars began to poke through the deepening blue of the Newport sky, I walked William and Sarah to the gangway. "Thank you for staying," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "You're always welcome on the Serenity." William shook my hand, his grip firm and sincere. "You're a good man, Ronald Parker. Don't let their smallness make you feel any less than what you are." I watched them walk away, their silhouettes steady and certain against the marina lights. The next morning, the harbor was silent and shrouded in a thin gray mist. I woke up in the master cabin, the queen-sized bed more comfortable than any I had ever slept in. I made a pot of coffee and sat at the navigation station, the same place where I had watched the footage that changed everything. My phone sat on the desk, blinking with missed calls and messages from Lindsay. "Dad, please answer. Derek is a mess. We need to talk about the house." I deleted them without reading the rest. The bridge between us hadn't just been damaged, it had been dismantled and the pieces thrown into the sea. I realized that for years I had been the one doing all the maintenance, while Derek had been busy loosening the bolts. I looked at the brass compass mounted near the pilot house, its needle pointing true north. It was time to follow it. I called the marina office and told them I'd be taking the boat out for a few days, just me and the water. I spent the afternoon untying the lines and checking the engines. The hum of the twin diesels was a powerful, reassuring vibration beneath my feet. As I slowly backed the Serenity out of her slip, I saw a familiar car pull into the parking lot. It was Derek's sedan. He jumped out and ran toward the dock, waving his arms frantically. I could see his face, twisted in a mask of desperation and greed, shouting words that were swallowed by the wind and the engine noise. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. I turned the wheel and pointed the bow toward the open ocean, the $28 million yacht responding to my touch like it was an extension of my own will. Derek stood on the edge of the pier, a small, angry figure getting smaller by the second. He was still shouting, still reaching for something he could no longer touch. He had thought I was a doting fool, a plumber who didn't belong in his world. Now, he was the one left behind on the shore, watching his future sail away. The wind picked up as I cleared the harbor, the salt spray stinging my face in a way that felt like life returning to my veins. I was 70 years old, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight. I wasn't a plumber or a social security check or a bank account to be managed. I was just a man on his boat, and the horizon was wide and clear. I pushed the throttles forward and the Serenity surged ahead, cutting through the waves with a grace that Derek could never understand. By sunset, I was miles away from Newport, the lights of the coast a faint glimmer on the edge of the world. I anchored in a quiet cove where the only sound was the water and the occasional cry of a gull. I sat on the deck and watched the stars come out, thousands of them, navigation points for a journey I was finally taking for myself. I thought of Margaret and how she would have loved the peace of this moment. I had used her legacy to find my freedom, and I knew she would have approved. 3 months later, the legal dust had finally settled. I had set up a trust for Lindsay, but it was locked tight. She would have enough to live on, but not enough to fund Derek's delusions of grandeur. My lawyers had been very clear. The yacht, the houses, and the investments were mine and mine alone, I received a final letter from Derek's attorney, a desperate plea for a settlement, which I dropped into the shredder without a second thought. I spent most of my time on the Serenity now. I had hired a small crew of people who loved the water as much as I did, and we traveled from Maine down to the Carolinas. I had become a fixture in the coastal marinas, the man in the simple khakis on the most beautiful boat in the harbor. People often asked me what I did for a living before I retired. I'd just smile and tell them I was a plumber who knew how to fix things before they broke too badly. One afternoon, while docked in Charleston, I saw a young father and his daughter walking along the pier. The girl was pointing at the Serenity, her eyes wide with wonder. The father looked at the boat with a mix of awe and respect, then looked at his daughter and smiled. It reminded me of the fish trips Lindsay and I used to take before Derek entered the picture. I realized then that while I couldn't go back, I could at least make sure my own compass was still pointing true. I invited them aboard for a quick tour. The girl's joy as she ran at her hand over the leather seats was the most beautiful thing I had seen in months. Her father was polite, asking intelligent questions about the navigation system, showing the kind of genuine interest that Derek had only ever faked. When they left, the girl gave me a shy wave from the dock. It was a small moment, but it felt like a final payment on a debt I had long owed myself. The Serenity sat steady in the water, her brass fittings catching the afternoon sun like scattered coins. I walked to the pilot house and touched the brass compass one last time. It was cold and solid under my hand, a reminder that the world is wide and that there is always a way forward if you have the courage to plot the course. I was no longer the pathetic pensioner Derek had tried to create. I was the master of my own ship, and the wind was exactly where it needed to be. I sat back in the pilot's chair and looked out over the bow. The tide was coming in, and the harbor was full of life. I picked up the logbook and began to write the plan for the next morning's departure. There were new coves to explore, new sunrises to watch, and a lifetime of peace to finally enjoy. As I closed the book, I felt the gentle sway of the yacht, a movement that didn't feel like a storm anymore, but like a heartbeat. I was home. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.